People only call a man heartless when they have never seen what he grieves in private. London, February 1848. Snow drifted against the tall windows of Ashcombe House in soft white spirals, while the chandeliers inside Lord Barrington's ballroom blazed like captured stars above the heads of England's finest aristocrats. Silk gowns shimmered beneath golden candlelight. Diamonds flashed at elegant throats. The orchestra played a lively waltz that echoed through the marble hall with polished perfection. Yet none of it held Lady Vivian Ashcombe's attention for very long. She stood near one of the towering windows with a glass of untouched champagne in her gloved hand, watching frost gather at the corners of the glass, rather than the dancers circling beneath the chandeliers. At 26, Vivian had mastered the art of appearing perfectly composed while feeling entirely elsewhere. "You look miserable," her younger cousin Daphne whispered as she approached in a cloud of pale blue silk and perfume. Vivian glanced sideways. "Thank you. You always know precisely how to flatter me." Daphne grinned. "I only mean you look as though you would rather be attending a funeral than a ball. At least funerals tend to be honest." That earned a laugh. Nearby, a cluster of ladies erupted into soft giggles behind jeweled fans as another gentleman crossed the ballroom toward them. Vivian recognized the look immediately. Hope, calculation, performance. Every woman in London seemed to wear the same expression during the season. Especially tonight, because tonight, the Duke of Blackmere had returned to society. Even now, his absence hovered over the ballroom more heavily than the orchestra itself. Conversations drifted around his name like smoke. They say he dismissed Lady Beatrice after only one dance. No. Worse. He refused her before the dance even began. Cold creature. Beautiful though. Terrifyingly so. Vivian exhaled quietly and turned back toward the snow outside. Duke Lucian Ravensheir. The Ice Duke. She had heard enough stories about him over the years to fill an entire library. Some claimed he had not smiled in nearly a decade. Others insisted he preferred solitude because he despised nearly everyone in society. One particularly dramatic dowager had once declared that the Duke looked at women the way generals looked at battlefields. Calmly, strategically, without affection. Vivian had never cared enough to decide whether any of it was true. Powerful men were rarely as mysterious as society wished them to be. Most were simply arrogant in expensive coats. "Do not look now," Daphne whispered suddenly. But he just entered. The shift in the room happened almost instantly, like a current moving through water. Gentlemen straightened. Mothers sat taller. Young ladies adjusted gloves, sleeves, curls, expressions. Even the musicians seemed to hesitate for half a breath before continuing. Vivian resisted the urge to turn immediately. She took a slow sip of champagne first. Then she glanced toward the ballroom entrance. The Duke of Blackmere stood beneath the archway in severe black evening attire that made him appear carved from winter itself. Tall, broad-shouldered, impossibly composed. Candlelight caught along the sharp edges of his face without softening them. His dark hair was brushed neatly back from his forehead, revealing gray eyes so cold and distant they scarcely seemed human from across the room. He acknowledged the room with a single restrained nod. Nothing more. Yet the entire ballroom bent subtly toward him anyway. Vivian disliked that immediately. Men should not carry that much power in silence alone. "Good heavens," Daphne breathed. "He is even more handsome than people claim." Vivian studied him carefully. Handsome men are rarely interesting. That is something women say only when handsome men do not notice them. Vivian almost smiled at that. Across the ballroom, Lucian Ravensheir moved through the crowd with measured calm, while introductions and greetings followed him endlessly. He accepted none for longer than necessary. A few young ladies attempted laughter near him. It died quickly. One gentleman clapped him on the shoulder. The Duke merely inclined his head once before continuing forward. "Does he ever look pleased?" Daphne asked. Perhaps pleasure would crack the marble. Before Vivian could answer, movement near the center of the ballroom caught everyone's attention. Lady Helena Whitcroft had approached the Duke. Beautiful, wealthy, and relentlessly admired, Helena was precisely the sort of woman mothers described as ideal Duchess material. Her silver gown sparkled beneath the chandeliers as she offered Lucian a graceful curtsy. Several nearby ladies visibly leaned closer. Waiting. Watching. Vivian should have looked away. Instead, curiosity rooted her in place. Helena smiled up at the Duke with practiced warmth. "Your Grace," she said softly. Though the ballroom had become so quiet her voice carried farther than intended. "I was hoping you might honor me with the next waltz." Lucien regarded her for one long moment. Not rudely, not kindly either. Simply unreadable. "I do not dance, Lady Helena." His voice was low and calm. "Not anymore." A faint ripple passed through the crowd. Helena maintained her smile with admirable effort. "Surely one dance cannot be so terrible." "For you," Lucien replied evenly. "Perhaps not." Silence. Sharp and immediate. Helena's face lost color beneath the candlelight. The humiliation was small enough to deny and sharp enough to wound anyway. Several women exchanged stunned glances behind their fans. A gentleman coughed awkwardly near the orchestra. Vivian felt her stomach tighten. Helena lowered her gaze. "Of course, Your Grace." Then she turned and walked away with rigid dignity while whispers exploded quietly through the ballroom. Daphne stared openly. That was cruel. Vivian did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on Lucien. He had not moved, had not softened, had not attempted apology or rescue. The Duke simply stood there while society absorbed another example of his infamous coldness. Then, unexpectedly, something shifted. Only for an instant. Helena disappeared into the crowd, and Lucien's gaze followed her retreating figure across the ballroom. Candlelight flickered across his expression. Vivian saw it clearly because she happened to be watching at the exact wrong moment. Pain. Not irritation. Not indifference. Pain so brief and carefully buried she might have imagined it entirely if she had blinked. Then it vanished. The Duke became marble again. Vivian frowned slightly. "What is it?" Daphne asked. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. Because for one strange second, Lucien Ravensheyer had looked less like a cruel man than a man forcing himself to endure something unbearable. The orchestra resumed more confidently. Conversations rose once more around the ballroom. Yet the atmosphere remained altered somehow, as though winter itself had entered the room beside the Duke and settled quietly over every candle flame. "Well," Daphne muttered, "I suppose every terrible rumor was true after all." Vivian watched Lucien accept another introduction with detached politeness. "Yes," she said softly. "I believe they were." And across the ballroom, as though sensing observation despite the crowded room between them, the Duke suddenly lifted his eyes and looked directly at her. The noise around her seemed to disappear. Vivian had met powerful men before. Politicians, earls, wealthy industrialists. None of them unsettled her. Yet something about Lucien Ravensheyr's gaze felt dangerously perceptive. Not flirtation, not admiration, recognition, as though he had caught her witnessing something she should not have seen. Neither of them looked away immediately. Then Lord Barrington interrupted beside the Duke with loud enthusiasm, and the moment shattered like thin ice beneath a boot. Vivian finally exhaled. Only then did she realize she had stopped breathing at all. The following morning, the snow had stopped, but London remained wrapped beneath a gray winter sky that made every stone building appear colder than usual. Vivian sat beside the breakfast room window at Ashcombe House with a cup of untouched tea cooling slowly between her hands while her father scanned correspondence across the table from her. The room smelled faintly of coal smoke and black tea. Once, the townhouse had been considered fashionable. Now the velvet curtains had begun fading at the edges, and the gilded trim along the ceiling carried tiny cracks no guest was meant to notice. Vivian noticed all of them. Financial decline had a way of sharpening the eye. "You were quiet last evening," Lord Ashcombe remarked without looking up. Vivian folded her napkin carefully beside her plate. "Most ballroom conversations fail to inspire me." "You spoke with no one of importance?" "That depends entirely upon one's definition of importance." Her father sighed heavily at that. At 58, Lord Edmund Ashcombe still carried traces of the handsome aristocrat he had once been, though years of poor investments and mounting debts had worn permanent fatigue into the corners of his face. He set down a letter and finally looked at her. "Vivian." The tone alone warned her. She straightened slightly. Yes, father. You are no longer 19. You cannot afford to drift through society untouched by practicality forever. There it was. The familiar conversation wrapped in different language. Marriage. Money. Necessity. Vivian reached for her tea simply to occupy her hands. And what practical miracle would you suggest this morning? The Duke of Blackmere. The cup paused halfway to her lips. For a moment she thought she had misheard him entirely. Then she laughed softly in disbelief. Absolutely not. You have not even allowed me to finish. You hardly need to. She set the cup down with more force than intended. Every unmarried woman in London is already throwing herself toward the Duke like sailors toward rescue boats. I have no intention of joining the crowd. This is not about romance. That fact alone is deeply reassuring. Lord Ashcombe ignored the remark. Blackmere is one of the wealthiest men in England. More importantly, he is politically connected in ways this family desperately requires. Vivian felt irritation sharpen beneath her ribs. You speak as though I am negotiating a trade agreement rather than a human life. Do not be dramatic. I am not being dramatic. I am being observant. Silence settled briefly between them while servants moved quietly around the room pretending not to hear. Vivian hated conversations like this most when they occurred politely. Cruelty wrapped in manners remained cruelty all the same. Her father rubbed tired fingers against his temple. The estate accounts arrived yesterday. His voice had changed. Softer now. More honest. We are running out of time. Vivian looked away toward the frost clouding the windows. She already knew matters were worsening. 2 maids had quietly disappeared from the household staff before Christmas. Their carriage horses had been sold and replaced with cheaper stock. Her mother's sapphire necklace had not appeared at any family gathering in nearly 6 months. Pride concealed many things. Money problems rarely stayed hidden forever. What exactly are you asking of me? She said finally. Lady Barrington is hosting a private dinner tomorrow evening. Lord Ashcombe slid an invitation across the table. The Duke will attend. Vivian stared at the cream-colored card without touching it. And you will speak with him. She almost laughed again. About what? Anything. You are intelligent enough to manage conversation for 10 minutes. You assume he would tolerate me for 10 seconds. Men like Blackmere notice women who challenge them. Vivian lifted her eyes slowly. Father, did you truly watch what happened last night and conclude that the Duke requires more challenge in his life? A faint shadow crossed Lord Ashcombe's expression. His reputation may work in our favor. Our favor. She repeated the words quietly. You truly do make it sound like a business arrangement. Sometimes survival is. The honesty of that struck harder than anger would have. Vivian pressed her fingers lightly against the edge of the table. She wanted to refuse outright, to stand, to leave, to preserve at least one corner of her life untouched by desperation. But she pictured the cracked ceiling upstairs, the unpaid accounts hidden inside her father's desk, the servants pretending not to worry. Pride did not keep estates standing through winter. Very well, she said at last. I will attend the dinner. Relief flickered briefly across her father's face before aristocratic restraint buried it again. Good. Vivian rose from the table before he could say anything else. But let us be clear about one thing. Lord Ashcombe looked up. I will not flirt for money. Vivian. I mean it. Her voice remained calm, though anger pulsed beneath every word. I may speak with the Duke. I may survive one evening beside him. But I will not parade myself like a desperate girl chasing a title. No one is asking you to. She held his gaze for a long moment. Neither of them believed that. By evening the following day, London had disappeared beneath freezing rain that streaked across carriage windows in silver lines while Vivian traveled toward Barrington House with her mother seated beside her. Lady Ashcombe adjusted the cuffs of her gloves nervously beneath the lantern glow. You look beautiful, she said softly. Vivian glanced down at her deep emerald gown. Elegant enough to appear respectable. Old enough that she had worn it twice before. That is fortunate, she replied, since apparently I am being sent into battle. Do not speak that way. Then perhaps no one should arrange me like a military strategy. Her mother's expression tightened with quiet sadness rather than offense. Your father is frightened. The irritation inside Vivian softened slightly. I know. Rain tapped steadily against the carriage roof. Outside, London blurred into gas lamps and dark stone buildings disappearing through mist. Blackmere may not be as terrible as people claim, Lady Ashcombe offered carefully. Vivian thought immediately of Helena Whitcroft standing humiliated beneath the chandeliers while Lucian Ravenshayer watched without apology. I believe he is precisely as terrible as people claim. Yet even as she said it, that strange moment returned to her memory. The flicker of pain in the Duke's eyes after Helena walked away. Brief, buried, human. Vivian disliked remembering it because it complicated things unnecessarily. Well, her mother said gently, perhaps tonight you will decide for yourself. Barrington House glowed against the rain like a palace of gold when they finally arrived. Footmen hurried forward beneath umbrellas while carriages lined the street in endless rows. Inside, warmth and music swallowed the storm immediately. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors. Gentle conversation drifted through richly decorated drawing rooms, scented with roses and candle wax. Vivian removed her gloves slowly while scanning the crowd. Then she saw him. Lucian Ravenshayer stood near one of the fireplaces speaking quietly with an older gentleman from Parliament. Black evening attire sharpened the severe lines of his appearance even further tonight. He looked composed to the point of danger. Untouchable. The kind of man people obeyed instinctively before realizing they had done so. As though sensing her gaze again, Lucian looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded room. No surprise crossed his face. Only recognition. Calm and immediate. Vivian suddenly became very aware of her father approaching beside her. There he is, Lord Ashcombe murmured quietly. Perfect. You say that as though discussing real estate. Go speak to him before the politicians corner him for the evening. Vivian kept her expression perfectly still. If I perish during this conversation, I expect the family to mourn appropriately. Vivian. She inhaled once. Then she crossed the room toward the coldest man in London. Lucian watched her approach without moving at all. Nearby conversations softened slightly as people noticed her direction. Of course they did. Society noticed everything, especially potential scandal. Vivian stopped several feet from him and offered a graceful curtsy. Your Grace. Lucian inclined his head once. Lady Vivian. His voice remained deep and unreadable. We meet again. Apparently London has decided to force the experience upon us. Something almost resembling amusement flickered briefly near his eyes before vanishing. The older politician excused himself moments later, sensing tension with the sharp instincts aristocrats developed over decades. Then Vivian found herself standing alone with the Duke entirely. Dangerous position. Dangerous silence. Lucian studied her calmly. You disapprove of me. The directness startled her enough that honesty escaped before caution returned. You noticed. You were not subtle. Neither were you. One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. In what regard? Vivian met his gaze evenly despite the sudden awareness curling low in her stomach. Most gentlemen attempt politeness before terrifying women at public events. Lucian did not appear offended. Lady Helena survived the experience. Barely. Candlelight flickered across the sharp angles of his face, while distant music drifted through the ballroom behind them. And yet, he said quietly, you still chose to walk directly toward me tonight. Vivian hated that he had noticed that too. My father insisted. Ah, one word. Calm. Knowing. Somehow worse than judgment. Her spine stiffened immediately. I assure you I am not here to pursue your fortune, Your Grace. Lucian held her gaze for one long, unreadable moment. I did not accuse you of it. You did not need to. Silence stretched between them while nearby guests pretended very badly not to observe. Vivian suddenly understood why women lost composure around this man. It was not merely his appearance. It was the feeling that he saw more than he revealed while giving away absolutely nothing himself. You dislike society, she said abruptly. And yet you continue attending. Duty. That sounds exhausting. It is. The answer came immediately. Honest. Unexpectedly so. Before Vivian could respond, another group approached requesting the Duke's attention. Lucian glanced toward them briefly, then back at her. Lady Vivian, Your Grace. He inclined his head once more. I hope the evening proves less disappointing than you anticipated. Then he walked away into the crowded drawing room, leaving Vivian standing beneath the candlelight with the strange and deeply unsettling realization that for the first time all evening, the Duke of Blackmere had not sounded cold at all. 3 days later, London society had already begun weaving stories around Lady Vivian Ashcombe and the Duke of Blackmere. Vivian discovered this while standing beneath the painted ceiling of Lady Dorset's winter musicale, listening to two elderly matrons whisper directly behind her as though she were furniture rather than a human being. He spoke with her for nearly 15 minutes. Impossible. Lord Barrington himself witnessed it. Well, Blackmere has always preferred unusual women. Vivian continued examining the orchestra with carefully practiced indifference while irritation simmered beneath her ribs. Society never needed facts when imagination proved more entertaining. The musicale occupied the grand drawing room of Dorset Manor, where candlelight reflected off gilded mirrors and violin music drifted softly through the crowded space. Outside, sleet rattled against the windows in uneven bursts. Inside, London's aristocracy gathered beneath warmth and crystal chandeliers to exchange gossip disguised as culture. Vivian would have preferred almost anywhere else. You have become interesting. Daphne appeared beside her carrying 2 glasses of champagne. My condolences. Vivian accepted one reluctantly. If another woman smiles at me with false sweetness tonight, I may flee into the snow and never return. Daphne laughed quietly. You should have seen Lady Helena when your name was mentioned earlier. Vivian glanced sideways. I would rather not. Apparently she believes Blackmere enjoys humiliating women publicly, and has now selected you as his newest victim. Vivian nearly replied before movement near the far end of the room interrupted her. Conversations shifted subtly, not silenced entirely this time, adjusted, like musicians tuning themselves instinctively around a single note. Lucian Ravensshire had arrived. He removed dark gloves slowly as a servant accepted his coat near the entrance. Snowflakes still clung faintly to his shoulders from outside. Candlelight flickered against the severe lines of his face while guests turned discreetly to observe him. Vivian noticed something immediately. He did not belong in rooms like this despite commanding every inch of them. There was no ease in him, no enjoyment, only control. And there goes half the unmarried female population of England. Daphne murmured under her breath as several young women repositioned themselves toward the Duke's path. Vivian watched Lucian greet Lady Dorset politely before moving farther into the crowd. He never lingered long with anyone. A few measured words, a restrained nod, then distance again, like a man carefully avoiding invisible traps only he could see. You are staring, Daphne whispered. I am observing. That is simply staring with more syllables. Vivian ignored her. Across the room, Lucian accepted a glass of champagne from a passing servant without drinking from it. A young countess attempted conversation beside him. He answered courteously enough, though within moments she looked vaguely intimidated and retreated toward safer company. Vivian exhaled quietly. He truly does make everyone uncomfortable. Perhaps because he looks as though he could read your worst thoughts before you speak them aloud. Before Vivian could answer, another figure swept elegantly into the Duke's orbit. Lady Celestia Whitmore, beautiful in the deliberate way that made entire ballrooms notice. Her silver satin gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers while diamonds sparkled at her throat like frost. Unlike many women around Lucian, Celestia did not appear intimidated at all. She appeared confident. Dangerous difference. Ah, Daphne murmured. There is trouble wrapped in silk. Vivian studied the woman carefully. She had heard of Celestia Whitmore for years. Wealthy, brilliant, socially untouchable. Rumors followed her constantly, though never long enough to stain her reputation permanently. Men adored her. Women admired her while quietly fearing her. Celestia approached Lucian with effortless familiarity. Your Grace, she said warmly. You vanished before supper at Barrington House. I was beginning to think you had finally abandoned society altogether. Lucien inclined his head once. Disappointment seems to follow me frequently. Celestia smiled. Only because you encourage it. The exchange sounded light enough. Yet Vivian noticed something strange immediately. Lucien's posture had changed almost imperceptibly. Still polite, still composed, but colder somehow, as though every instinct inside him had quietly withdrawn behind locked doors. Interesting, Daphne whispered. What? That is the first time tonight he has looked genuinely unhappy. Vivian frowned slightly. She had noticed it too. Celestia touched Lucien lightly on the sleeve while speaking again. The Duke stepped back almost instantly. Small movement, easy to miss. Vivian did not miss it. Neither did Celestia. For one brief moment, irritation flashed across the woman's beautiful face before the charming smile returned. I have heard, Celestia said more loudly now, that Lady Vivian Ashcombe has become your newest conversational companion. Nearby guests immediately pretended not to listen. Vivian felt heat creep faintly into her cheeks. Lucien's expression did not change at all. London suffers from excessive imagination. Do not sound so disappointed, Celestia replied smoothly. Lady Vivian is lovely enough to inspire envy. Her eyes shifted toward Vivian then. Directly, calculating. The smile remained. It did not reach her eyes. Daphne muttered under her breath. I dislike her instantly. Vivian understood why. There was something unsettling about women who smiled as though every conversation concealed another meaning underneath it. Lucien finally glanced toward Vivian across the crowded room. Calm recognition flickered briefly in his gaze before he returned his attention to Celestia. If you will excuse me, he said quietly. I fear Parliament requires my attention more urgently than gossip. Then he walked away. Celestia watched him leave for one long moment before turning slowly toward Vivian instead. How fascinating, she murmured softly. Daphne stiffened beside her. Lady Celestia. Lady Daphne. Celestia approached with graceful confidence while nearby guests discreetly drifted closer under the pretense of conversation. Society smelled tension like wolves scented blood beneath snow. Lady Vivian, Celestia said pleasantly. I do not believe we have properly met. Vivian offered a polite nod. I believe we have now corrected the oversight. Indeed, Celestia studied her for a moment too long. You must forgive London for its excitement. The Duke rarely notices anyone twice. Daphne nearly choked on her champagne. Vivian remained perfectly still. How fortunate, then, that I have never required his notice to survive. Something sharp flickered behind Celestia's smile. Approval, perhaps, or irritation. Difficult to tell. Careful, Celestia said softly. Men like Blackmere are safest from a distance. Vivian met her gaze evenly. Then I imagine you must feel very secure indeed. For the first time all evening, genuine surprise crossed Celestia Whitmore's face. Brief, gone quickly. Then she laughed lightly as though the exchange amused her rather than challenged her. You are more interesting than people claim, Lady Vivian. And you are exactly as interesting as people claim. Daphne made a small choking sound beside her that suspiciously resembled hidden laughter. Celestia's smile sharpened almost invisibly. I do hope you enjoy your season. Then she turned gracefully and disappeared back into the crowd. Silence lingered for a moment after she left. Daphne stared openly. I believe you just declared war. I merely defended myself. Against Lady Celestia Whitmore, which is apparently the social equivalent of wrestling a tiger. Vivian took a slow sip of champagne. Then perhaps the tiger should stop prowling toward me. Yet despite her calm words, unease curled quietly beneath her composure. Because during that entire conversation, one detail had unsettled her most. Lucien Ravenshire had not looked cold when speaking to Celestia Whitmore. He had looked wary. Later that evening, the orchestra transitioned into a waltz while couples drifted toward the ballroom floor in glittering circles of silk and black coats. Vivian remained near the edge of the room, grateful not to dance. Her thoughts kept returning unwillingly toward Lucien, toward the strange tension between him and Celestia, toward the way his expression hardened whenever society pressed too closely around him. Lady Vivian. She turned. Lucian stood beside her once again. Somehow she had not noticed his approach at all. The music softened around them while dancers moved beneath golden chandeliers nearby. Your Grace. You survived, Lady Celestia. His tone carried the faintest trace of dry amusement. Vivian blinked once in surprise. Barely. Then you have accomplished something many gentlemen fail to manage. She studied him carefully beneath the candlelight. You dislike her. The words escaped before caution could stop them. Lucian's gaze settled on her face. Calm. Measuring. That is a dangerous observation. It is also accurate. For a moment he said nothing. Then distant laughter echoed across the ballroom, and his eyes shifted briefly toward the orchestra before returning to her again. Lady Vivian, he said quietly, there are certain people in society whom it is wiser not to trust. You speak from experience? Something unreadable moved behind his eyes then. Not anger. Something older than anger. Yes. The single word carried enough weight to still her completely. Before she could respond, a servant approached Lucian discreetly and murmured something near his shoulder. The Duke's entire expression changed at once. Not dramatic, not obvious, yet tension sharpened instantly through every line of his body. Excuse me. He stepped back, already turning away. Vivian frowned slightly. Is something wrong? Lucian paused only briefly. Candlelight flickered across his face, revealing something dangerously close to exhaustion beneath all that control. Nothing that concerns you, Lady Vivian. Then he disappeared from the musicale without another word, leaving snow swirling beyond the tall windows and a strange unanswered feeling settling heavily inside her chest. The rain turned heavier 2 days later as Vivian's carriage traveled north beyond the edges of London beneath a sky the color of ash. Water streaked across the windows in endless silver ribbons while bare winter trees blurred past along the roadside. Across from her, Lady Ashcombe adjusted her traveling gloves with visible uncertainty. I still believe this invitation is peculiar, her mother admitted quietly. Vivian glanced down at the cream-colored letter resting in her lap once more. The seal of Blackmere House remained unmistakable even after being broken. Lady Vivian Ashcombe, the Duke of Blackmere requests the honor of your company at Blackmere Court this Thursday afternoon regarding a charitable matter requiring discreet assistance. No additional explanation. No signature beyond his title. No indication whatsoever why Lucian Ravensshire had chosen her specifically. You believe everything involving the Duke is peculiar, Vivian replied softly. Can you honestly claim otherwise? No, she could not. Ever since the musicale at Dorset Manor, the Duke had occupied her thoughts with increasing irritation. Not because she liked him. That would have been simpler. Understandable, even. No, Lucian Ravensshire unsettled her because he contradicted himself constantly. Society called him cold. Yet she had seen exhaustion in his eyes when no one else noticed. Women claimed he was cruel. Yet he moved through crowded ballrooms like a man enduring punishment rather than enjoying power. And then there was the warning he had given her. There are certain people in society whom it is wiser not to trust. The memory lingered unpleasantly, especially because she suspected he had meant Celestia Whitmore. Perhaps he merely wishes to discuss one of Father's investments, Lady Ashcombe suggested hopefully. Vivian almost smiled at the transparent attempt to sound optimistic. A duke does not summon unmarried women into the countryside to discuss financial reports. Well, at least you are not alone. That at least was true. Her mother accompanied her, along with 2 servants and a coachman enduring miserable weather conditions outside. Respectability remained intact. Barely. The carriage jolted lightly over uneven ground as they passed through enormous iron gates bearing the Ravensshire crest. Vivian looked up instinctively. Blackmere Court emerged through the rain moments later like something from an old Gothic painting. Vast gray stone walls rose against the storm beneath towering windows and steep slate roofs darkened by weather. Ivy climbed one side of the estate despite winter's grip. Beyond the manor, endless acres of frost-covered land disappeared into mist. Good heavens, Lady Ashcombe whispered. Vivian understood the reaction. Blackmere Court did not resemble a home. It resembled history itself. Ancient, silent, watching. The carriage rolled beneath the massive front portico, while servants hurried forward carrying lanterns against the rain. The great doors opened before they fully stopped moving. Warmth spilled outward immediately along with candlelight and the faint scent of cedarwood. A distinguished older butler bowed politely as Vivian stepped inside. "Lady Vivian, Lady Ashcombe, welcome to Blackmere Court." Vivian removed her gloves slowly while studying the enormous entrance hall around her. Marble floors reflected golden chandelier light overhead. Grand staircases curved upward along opposite sides of the hall. Portraits lined the walls in heavy gilded frames, generations of Ravensshire aristocrats staring down with severe expressions that suggested smiling had never been encouraged within the family. Yet despite the luxury surrounding her, something about the estate felt strangely quiet. Not empty exactly, guarded. "His Grace apologizes for being briefly delayed," the butler continued. "You are requested in the west drawing room." Vivian exchanged a quick glance with her mother before following him deeper into the manor. Their footsteps echoed softly through long corridors illuminated by candle sconces. Rain battered the tall windows while distant thunder rolled across the countryside outside. "It feels like a cathedral," Lady Ashcombe murmured under her breath. Vivian nodded faintly. Every room they passed carried the same atmosphere. Elegant, immaculate, and somehow deeply lonely. The west drawing room overlooked the rear gardens where winter roses struggled beneath the storm outside. A fire crackled warmly inside while tea waited untouched upon a silver tray near the windows. Vivian had scarcely entered before movement near the far side of the room caught her attention. A child sat quietly beside the fireplace, little more than 6 years old. Thin, pale, wrapped carefully in a soft blue blanket while reading a picture book almost twice the size of her lap. Vivian blinked in surprise. The girl looked up immediately at the sound of voices. Large gray eyes met Vivian's with open curiosity. The resemblance struck instantly. Same silver-gray eyes as Lucian Ravensshire. Same dark hair. Same stillness. "Oh," Lady Ashcombe said softly. The child rose carefully from her chair with visible caution, as though sudden movement might exhaust her. "Good afternoon," she said politely. Her voice sounded delicate but cheerful. Vivian smiled automatically despite herself. "Good afternoon." Before anyone could say more, the drawing room door opened again behind them. Lucian entered quietly, removing dark leather gloves one finger at a time while rainwater still glistened faintly along the shoulders of his coat. He stopped immediately upon seeing the child standing beside the fire. Every line of tension inside him changed at once. Vivian felt it before she fully understood it. His entire presence softened. Not dramatically. Not enough for most people to notice. But enough. "You should be sitting down, Eleanor." The deep restraint in his voice remained, yet warmth threaded beneath it unmistakably now. The little girl smiled faintly. "I'm not tired today." Lucian crossed the room toward her without hesitation. "You said the same thing yesterday, and I was fine. You nearly collapsed in the conservatory." "Only a little." A quiet sigh escaped him. Not irritated. Familiar. Vivian stood completely still watching the exchange unfold. Because the man kneeling calmly beside the child near the fireplace looked nothing like the cold Duke London whispered about endlessly. Lucian adjusted the blanket more securely around Eleanor's shoulders with careful hands before resting one gloved palm briefly against her forehead. Checking her temperature, perhaps. The movement carried such instinctive gentleness that Vivian almost forgot to breathe for a moment. "Have you taken your medicine?" he asked quietly. Eleanor made a face. "It tastes terrible." That was not the question. "Yes." A faint flicker touched Lucian's mouth then. Not quite a smile, but close enough to startle Vivian more than any ballroom scandal ever could. "Very brave," he murmured. Eleanor noticed Vivian watching them and brightened immediately. "Are you father's guest?" Silence fell. Small. Sudden. Vivian's eyes shifted instinctively toward Lucian. The Duke had gone completely still beside the child. Lady Ashcombe looked equally startled. Eleanor blinked innocently between them all. "Nurse says father never invites anyone." The air in the room changed so subtly most people might not have recognized it. Vivian did. Lucian rose slowly to his full height, composure returning around him like armor locking back into place. "Eleanor," he said calmly. "Lady Vivian is visiting regarding charitable matters." The child tilted her head thoughtfully. "Oh!" Yet disappointment flickered visibly across her face before she attempted hiding it. Vivian's chest tightened unexpectedly. "I am still very pleased to meet you," she said gently. Eleanor smiled again almost instantly. "I like your dress." "Thank you. I admire your book. It is about knights. An excellent subject." Lucian watched the exchange silently from several feet away. Rain struck harder against the windows while firelight flickered across the drawing room walls. Something strange moved through Vivian then. Not attraction. Not yet. Something quieter. Confusion, perhaps. Because she had expected arrogance from the Duke of Blackmere. Distance. Control. Cruelty, even. She had not expected tenderness spoken so carefully beside a fireplace while a sick child leaned trustingly against his arm. A nursemaid entered moments later carrying folded blankets. "Miss Eleanor," she said warmly. "It is time to rest." Eleanor sighed dramatically. "Everyone here is terribly strict. Especially His Grace." The nurse agreed with a smile. Lucian remained entirely unapologetic. "Bed." Eleanor looked toward Vivian once more while allowing the nurse to guide her toward the door. "Will you visit again?" Vivian hesitated. Strange question. Stranger still was the faint look of alarm that crossed Lucian's face immediately afterward. Small, buried quickly, but unmistakable. Before Vivian could answer, Lucian spoke first. "That depends entirely upon Lady Vivian." Eleanor accepted this solemnly. "Then I hope she says yes." The child disappeared into the hallway moments later, leaving silence behind her. Vivian slowly turned toward Lucian. Candlelight flickered across his expression while distant thunder echoed outside the manor. "Your daughter?" she asked softly. Lucian's jaw tightened almost invisibly. No, only one word. Yet grief moved beneath it so sharply that Vivian regretted asking immediately. The Duke crossed toward the fireplace and stared into the flames for several quiet seconds before speaking again. "Eleanor is my responsibility." Responsibility. Not affection. Not obligation. Yet Vivian had witnessed enough already to know he cared for the child far more deeply than his restrained words admitted aloud. "She seems very attached to you," Lady Ashcombe observed gently. Lucian remained facing the fire. "Unfortunately." Vivian frowned slightly. "That hardly sounds unfortunate." At last he looked back toward her. Firelight caught in his gray eyes, revealing exhaustion there once more beneath all that discipline and restraint. "Everyone who grows attached to me eventually suffers for it, Lady Vivian." The words settled heavily into the drawing room while rain battered the manor windows and somewhere deep inside Blackmere Court. A clock began striking the hour. Dinner at Blackmere Court unfolded beneath an atmosphere so restrained it felt almost ceremonial. Candlelight glowed across polished silver and crystal, while rain whispered steadily against the towering dining room windows. A fire burned at the far end of the enormous chamber, though its warmth barely softened the solemn grandeur surrounding the long mahogany table. Portraits of long-dead Ravenshire's watched from the walls in heavy gilded frames. None of them appeared particularly cheerful. Vivian sat beside her mother halfway down the table while Lucian occupied the seat at the opposite end with the composed stillness of a man entirely accustomed to silence. Conversation drifted politely between courses, mostly guided by Lady Ashcombe's determined attempts to ease the tension filling the room. The Duke answered every question with flawless courtesy. Yet there remained something carefully distant about him even here inside his own home, as though part of him never truly entered the room at all. "Blackmere Court is extraordinary," Lady Ashcombe said warmly while servants replaced empty plates. "I cannot imagine the effort required to maintain an estate of this size." Lucian set down his wineglass quietly. "Most of the credit belongs to the staff rather than myself. Still," she continued, "the grounds alone must require dozens of gardeners." 43. Vivian looked up automatically. "You know the exact number?" "I know the name of every person employed on my estate." The answer came calmly, matter of fact. Yet something about it unsettled her again because arrogant men rarely bothered learning the names of servants and gardeners. Lucien noticed her expression immediately. Of course he did. The man appeared to notice everything. You seem surprised, Lady Vivian. A little. She reached carefully for her water glass. Most aristocrats consider servants part of the furniture. A faint shadow crossed his face then. That has always struck me as a convenient form of blindness. Silence followed briefly. Vivian became aware of the footman beside her pausing almost imperceptibly while pouring wine. Even the servants listened when the Duke spoke. Not out of fear. Respect, perhaps. Strange realization. You dislike society more than I originally believed, she observed. Lucien's gaze rested on her across the candlelit table. Society has earned very little affection from me. Before Vivian could respond, the dining room doors opened quietly once more. Eleanor appeared beside the butler wrapped in a pale blue robe with a wool blanket around her shoulders. Her dark hair fell loosely against her back now, making her look even younger. Miss Eleanor could not sleep, the butler explained apologetically. Lucien rose from his chair immediately. Not irritated, not embarrassed. Immediate concern replaced every trace of distant composure instead. You should be upstairs. Eleanor looked mildly guilty. I know. Then why are you here? Because Cook made lemon cakes. To Vivian's astonishment, the Duke closed his eyes briefly as though surrendering to inevitable defeat. A powerful argument, he admitted quietly. Eleanor smiled triumphantly and crossed toward the table while servants hurried to prepare another place setting without instruction. Vivian watched the entire scene carefully. The household moved around Eleanor with practiced gentleness. Protective gentleness. One maid adjusted the child's blanket automatically. Another placed warm tea beside her small plate before she even asked. Lucien remained standing beside Eleanor until she settled comfortably into the chair nearest him. Only then did he sit again himself. You spoil her, Lady Ashcombe observed softly with unmistakable affection. Lucien cut neatly into his dinner without looking up. Frequently. Eleanor brightened immediately. He lets me have hot chocolate whenever the doctors leave. That is because the doctors are terrifying, Lucien replied dryly. Especially Dr. Whitmore. He smells like old books. Vivian nearly smiled into her wineglass. Across the table, she noticed something extraordinary happening slowly around Lucien whenever Eleanor spoke. The severe edges of him softened. Not completely, but enough to reveal glimpses of the man hidden beneath all that restraint. Lady Vivian says she likes night stories, Eleanor announced suddenly. Lucien's eyes lifted toward Vivian at once. An excellent literary preference. Do you like them too? Eleanor asked him. I tolerate them. That means yes, the child informed Vivian confidently. His Grace dislikes admitting he enjoys things. To Vivian's surprise, Lucien did not deny it. A small silence settled afterward while candle flames flickered gently between them. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows beyond the dark gardens outside. How long has Eleanor lived here? Vivian asked carefully after a moment. The effect of the question proved immediate. Lucien's posture stiffened almost invisibly. Eleanor lowered her spoon. Even the servants seemed quieter suddenly. 3 years, Lucien answered at last. That is a very long time, Vivian said gently. Yes. Nothing more followed. Yet the single word carried enough heaviness to silence further questions immediately. Eleanor focused on her dessert with unusual concentration now, as though she had learned long ago when conversations should end. Vivian noticed that too, and something inside her tightened unexpectedly. After dinner, Lady Ashcombe retired early with a headache while Lucien disappeared briefly into his study for estate business. Vivian found herself wandering alone through one of Blackmere Court's endless corridors, unable to quiet the strange restlessness lingering inside her chest. The manor felt different at night, larger somehow. Candlelight stretched across polished floors while distant grandfather clocks echoed faintly through the silence. Outside, the storm had weakened into soft snowfall drifting past the tall windows. Vivian paused near an enormous portrait gallery lined with generations of Ravensshire ancestors. Dukes, duchesses, military officers, stern women draped in silk and jewels. Yet one portrait near the end of the corridor drew her attention instantly. A young woman stood painted beneath spring blossoms wearing a pale ivory gown, while sunlight illuminated dark curls around her smiling face. Unlike the others, this portrait carried warmth. Life. The brass plaque beneath it read simply, Lady Evelyn Ravenshire. Vivian stared at the name. Evelyn. Something about it stirred vague recognition. Before she could place why, quiet footsteps approached behind her. Most people prefer the larger portraits downstairs. Lucien's voice drifted softly through the corridor. Vivian turned too quickly. I did not mean to intrude. He stopped beside her beneath the candlelight, hands clasped loosely behind his back. You are not intruding. His gaze shifted toward the portrait then. Everything in his expression changed again. Not dramatically, quietly, the same way winter shifts just before snow begins falling. She was beautiful, Vivian said carefully. Yes. Lucien remained looking at the painting rather than her. She was. Silence stretched between them. Vivian suddenly remembered where she had heard the name before. At the musicale. Servants whispering. Lady Evelyn. The name no one seemed willing to explain. Your sister? She asked softly. Lucien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You are observant, Lady Vivian. Not an answer. Yet enough. Vivian studied the portrait again. Evelyn Ravenshire looked astonishingly alive beneath the painter's brush. Joyful. Untouched by sorrow. She resembles Eleanor. The moment the words left her mouth, the corridor fell completely still. Lucien looked at her then. Truly looked at her. Not with coldness. Something far more dangerous. Pain stripped bare beneath restraint so severe it almost hurt to witness. Vivian's breath caught quietly. She had guessed correctly. I apologize, she said immediately. I should not have asked. Lucien turned away from the portrait at last. Candlelight sharpened the exhaustion along his face now that distance no longer concealed it entirely. Most people in society already know the story, he said quietly. Or believe they do. Snow drifted silently beyond the tall windows while the enormous manor remained hushed around them. Vivian waited without speaking. Something told her interruption would send him retreating behind those invisible walls again. Lucien's eyes returned briefly toward his sister's portrait. Evelyn died 3 years ago. The words landed gently. No dramatic emotion. Somehow that made them worse. I am sorry. He inclined his head once in acknowledgement. Eleanor is her daughter. Vivian felt her chest tighten instantly. The child upstairs with gray eyes and fragile health. The child Lucien guarded with impossible care. Not his daughter. His niece. Does Eleanor know? She asked softly. Lucien remained silent for several seconds. No. Will you tell her someday? A long pause followed. Then, quietly, I do not know how. The honesty in those words unsettled her more than anything else he had ever said. Because for the first time since meeting him, Lucien Ravenshire did not sound powerful at all. He sounded tired, deeply tired. Vivian looked once more toward Evelyn's portrait. She must have loved Eleanor very much. Something flickered across Lucien's face then. Brief and devastating. More than anything, a grandfather clock echoed somewhere deeper inside the manor. Midnight, perhaps. Neither of them moved immediately afterward. Snow continued falling softly outside Blackmere Court while candlelight trembled across the portrait of a smiling young woman whose name society no longer spoke aloud. At last Vivian turned slightly toward him. What happened to her? Lucien's expression closed instantly. Not cruelly, reflexively, like a door shutting against winter wind. That, he said quietly, is not a story suited for pleasant evenings. Then he walked away down the dark corridor alone, leaving Vivian standing beneath the portrait of Lady Evelyn Ravenshire with a strange ache settling heavily beneath her ribs and the unmistakable feeling that somewhere inside Blackmere Court, grief still lived like a ghost no one dared disturb. Vivian intended to leave Blackmere Court the following morning. That had been the plan. Simple, sensible, necessary. Instead, a snowstorm swept across the countryside before dawn with such force that the roads became impassable within hours. By breakfast, The estate had vanished beneath layers of white so thick the world beyond the manor windows looked entirely erased. The eastern road has disappeared completely, the butler informed them calmly while servants carried fresh tea into the drawing room. His Grace recommends postponing departure until tomorrow at the earliest. Lady Ashcombe looked disappointed but unsurprised. Nature appears determined to keep us here. Vivian lowered her teacup slowly. Across the room, Lucien stood near the fire reading correspondence with the same severe composure he seemed to wear as naturally as breathing. Blackmere Court remains warm enough despite the storm, he said without looking up. You are welcome to remain as long as necessary. You are very kind, Your Grace, Lady Ashcombe replied. Vivian nearly objected to the word kind instinctively. Then she remembered Lucien kneeling beside Eleanor near the fireplace, adjusting a blanket with patient hands while the child complained about medicine tasting terrible. The contradiction unsettled her again. The storm should pass by tomorrow evening, Lucien continued. Until then, I suggest avoiding the West Gardens. The paths become dangerous beneath heavy snow. Vivian glanced toward the windows where white flakes drifted endlessly against the gray morning sky. Does Eleanor enjoy the snow? Lucien finally lifted his eyes from the papers in his hand. She enjoys ignoring every medical instruction given to her. That means yes, Vivian said softly before she could stop herself. Something faint moved near his mouth again. Almost a smile. Almost impossible to catch unless one watched carefully. Yes, he admitted quietly. That means yes. The rest of the morning passed slowly beneath the hush of falling snow. Blackmere Court seemed quieter during daylight. Less intimidating perhaps. Or maybe Vivian had simply begun noticing the life hidden beneath its silence. Servants moved comfortably through the halls rather than fearfully. Fresh flowers appeared in every sitting room despite winter outside. Somewhere distant, piano music drifted softly through the manor before stopping abruptly. Evidence of people, of warmth, things she had not expected from the Duke of Blackmere. After luncheon, Lady Ashcombe retired upstairs to write letters, while Eleanor slept under the doctor's strict instructions. Vivian wandered restlessly through the endless corridors, unable to settle her thoughts properly. The previous evening lingered too heavily in her mind. Evelyn Ravensshire, the portrait, Lucien's face beneath candlelight when speaking about his sister. She reached the upper gallery almost without realizing it. Snowlight filtered pale and silver through tall windows overlooking the frozen gardens below. Most doors along the corridor remained closed. Private family rooms, perhaps. Vivian slowed near one partially open doorway at the far end of the hall. Music drifted faintly from inside. Not live performance. A music box. Delicate notes repeating the same melancholy melody again and again. She hesitated. Then curiosity betrayed her completely. The room beyond looked untouched by time. Sunlight filtered softly across pale blue wallpaper and shelves lined with books bound in faded leather. Fresh flowers stood arranged near the windows despite winter outside. A white shawl rested carefully over the back of a chair, as though someone had only just left it there moments earlier. Vivian stepped inside slowly. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Every object in the room appeared preserved with impossible care. A silver hairbrush beside the vanity. Gloves folded neatly atop a writing desk. A pressed flower hidden inside an open book near the window seat. The music box rested beside the bed, turning softly on its own. Vivian felt strange standing there, like entering someone's memory rather than a room. Her gaze drifted toward the far wall where another portrait of Evelyn Ravensshire hung above the fireplace. Younger this time, laughing openly while spring sunlight. Vivian intended to leave Blackmere Court the following morning. That had been the plan. Simple, sensible, necessary. Instead, a snowstorm swept across the countryside before dawn with such force that the roads became impassable within hours. By breakfast, the estate had vanished beneath layers of white so thick the world beyond the manor windows looked entirely erased. The eastern road has disappeared completely, the butler informed them calmly while servants carried fresh tea into the drawing room. His Grace recommends postponing departure until tomorrow at the earliest. Lady Ashcombe looked disappointed but unsurprised. Nature appears determined to keep us here. Vivian lowered her teacup slowly. Across the room, Lucien stood near the fire reading correspondence with the same severe composure he seemed to wear as naturally as breathing. Blackmere Court remains warm enough despite the storm, he said without looking up. You are welcome to remain as long as necessary. You are very kind, Your Grace, Lady Ashcombe replied. Vivian nearly objected to the word kind instinctively. Then she remembered Lucien kneeling beside Eleanor near the fireplace, adjusting a blanket with patient hands while the child complained about medicine tasting terrible. The contradiction unsettled her again. The storm should pass by tomorrow evening, Lucien continued. Until then, I suggest avoiding the West Gardens. The paths become dangerous beneath heavy snow. Vivian glanced toward the windows where white flakes drifted endlessly against the gray morning sky. Does Eleanor enjoy the snow? Lucien finally lifted his eyes from the papers in his hand. She enjoys ignoring every medical instruction given to her. That means yes, Vivian said softly before she could stop herself. Something faint moved near his mouth again. Almost a smile. Almost impossible to catch unless one watched carefully. Yes, he admitted quietly. That means yes. The rest of the morning passed slowly beneath the hush of falling snow. Blackmere Court seemed quieter during daylight. Less intimidating perhaps. Or maybe Vivian had simply begun noticing the life hidden beneath its silence. Servants moved comfortably through the halls rather than fearfully. Fresh flowers appeared in every sitting room despite winter outside. Somewhere distant, piano music drifted softly through the manor before stopping abruptly. Evidence of people, of warmth, things she had not expected from the Duke of Blackmere. After luncheon, Lady Ashcombe retired upstairs to write letters, while Eleanor slept under the doctor's strict instructions. Vivian wandered restlessly through the endless corridors, unable to settle her thoughts properly. The previous evening lingered too heavily in her mind. Evelyn Ravensshire, the portrait, Lucien's face beneath candlelight when speaking about his sister. She reached the upper gallery almost without realizing it. Snowlight filtered pale and silver through tall windows overlooking the frozen gardens below. Most doors along the corridor remained closed. Private family rooms, perhaps. Vivian slowed near one partially open doorway at the far end of the hall. Music drifted faintly from inside. Not live performance. A music box. Delicate notes repeating the same melancholy melody again and again. She hesitated. Then curiosity betrayed her completely. The room beyond looked untouched by time. Sunlight filtered softly across pale blue wallpaper and shelves lined with books bound in faded leather. Fresh flowers stood arranged near the windows despite winter outside. A white shawl rested carefully over the back of a chair, as though someone had only just left it there moments earlier. Vivian stepped inside slowly. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. Every object in the room appeared preserved with impossible care. A silver hairbrush beside the vanity. Gloves folded neatly atop a writing desk. A pressed flower hidden inside an open book near the window seat. The music box rested beside the bed, turning softly on its own. Vivian felt strange standing there, like entering someone's memory rather than a room. Her gaze drifted toward the far wall where another portrait of Evelyn Ravensshire hung above the fireplace. Younger this time, laughing openly while spring sunlight. The storm finally broke the following afternoon, leaving Blackmere Court surrounded by untouched fields of silver-white snow glittering beneath pale winter sunlight. For the first time in days, light poured through the towering manor windows without interruption from rain or clouds. The entire estate seemed to exhale quietly beneath the sudden stillness. Vivian stood near the library window watching servants clear snow from the front drive while distant horse hooves echoed faintly across the frozen grounds. Somewhere behind her, pages turned softly. She did not need to look to know Lucien occupied the chair beside the fire. Over the past 2 days, his silence had become strangely recognizable to her. Not empty, controlled, measured the way some men carried weapons. The roads should be passable by tomorrow morning, Lucien said at last without lifting his eyes from the book resting in his hand. Vivian's fingers tightened slightly around the warm porcelain teacup she held. Tomorrow. She had wanted to leave desperately when she first arrived at Blackmere Court. Now the thought unsettled her more than expected. I imagine London will celebrate your return to society once more, she replied softly. Society rarely celebrates my presence. That is not true. Lucian finally looked up then. Firelight flickered faintly across his gray eyes while snowlight washed pale gold across the library shelves around them. You believe people admire me? Vivian hesitated. Admire was not the correct word. Fear perhaps. Obsess. Speculate. Judge. I believe they are fascinated by you, she answered honestly. A faint shadow crossed his expression. There is very little worth admiring beneath fascination. Silence settled gently afterward. Comfortable this time. Strange realization. Vivian had never imagined silence beside Lucian Ravensheim could become comfortable. Yet somehow it had. The library itself felt warmer than the rest of the manor. Less haunted. Tall shelves climbed toward painted ceilings, while afternoon sunlight glowed across dark wood floors and leather chairs softened by years of use. Eleanor slept upstairs after exhausting herself building a miniature snow fort beside the conservatory that morning under Lucian's relentless supervision. Vivian smiled, faintly remembering the scene. The Duke of Blackmere standing ankle-deep in snow arguing patiently with a 7-year-old about proper scarf placement while servants pretended not to laugh nearby. No ballroom in London would have believed it. You are smiling, Lucian observed quietly. Vivian blinked. Am I? Yes. His voice remained calm. It appears Eleanor's military campaign against winter succeeded. A soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Lucian watched her for a moment too long afterward. Not coldly. Something gentler now. More dangerous because she no longer understood how to defend herself against it. Vivian lowered her eyes toward the teacup in her hands. She adores you. Lucian leaned back slightly in the armchair beside the fire. She deserves better than a grieving uncle who keeps her hidden from the world. You do not hide her because you are ashamed. No, his answer came immediately. I hide her because society destroys fragile things. The quiet certainty in his voice struck deeply. Vivian looked toward the falling snow outside. You truly believe that? I know it. Neither spoke for several moments afterward. The crackling fire filled the silence while distant wind brushed softly against the windows. At last Vivian crossed slowly toward one of the enormous bookshelves lining the far wall. Her fingers traced absent-mindedly along worn leather spines while thoughts tangled heavily inside her chest. Ever since reading Evelyn's letters the previous evening, nothing felt simple anymore. Not Lucian's coldness. Not his distance. Not the grief hidden beneath every controlled movement he made. She stopped near a shelf crowded with poetry volumes and reached automatically for one resting too high above eye level. The book shifted awkwardly. Before she could steady herself properly, another hand appeared beside hers. Strong fingers caught the falling volume before it struck the floor. Vivian froze instantly. Lucian stood directly behind her now, close enough that she could feel warmth lingering from the fire against the dark wool of his coat. Careful, he said quietly. His voice sounded lower from this distance. Closer. Vivian looked up instinctively. Mistake. His face was only inches away beneath the softened afternoon light filtering through the library windows. No ballroom distance. No crowded drawing room separating them. Just quiet. Warmth. And those impossible gray eyes studying her with an intensity that stole thought itself for one dangerous second. Thank you, she managed softly. Lucian handed her the book slowly without moving away immediately. You favor poetry? Only the tragic kind. Something flickered near his mouth then. Naturally, Vivian became suddenly aware of how still the room had become around them. Of the way her pulse had betrayed her completely. She stepped back first. Cowardly perhaps. Necessary certainly. Lucian seemed to notice the retreat instantly. His expression shuddered slightly afterward. Not offended. Careful. I apologize, he said quietly. You have done nothing wrong. That has rarely stopped me from regretting things. The words escaped before she fully understood them. Lucian looked away toward the fire. Especially where people I care about are concerned. Vivian's chest tightened unexpectedly. You blame yourself for Evelyn. Silence. Heavy and immediate. Lucian remained motionless beside the shelves. Every day. The honesty in those 2 words hurt far more than she expected. Lucian. She spoke his name before thinking. The effect proved immediate. He looked back at her slowly. Not startled exactly. But something shifted visibly in his expression hearing his given name spoken softly inside the quiet library. Vivian felt heat rise faintly beneath her skin. Aristocratic propriety screamed at her to correct herself immediately. She could not seem to form the words. "You could not have controlled what society chose to become," she said instead. No, his gaze held hers steadily now. "But I should have seen the danger sooner." Vivian remembered Evelyn's letters. The loneliness hidden beneath every careful sentence. The desperate hope that someone would defend her before whispers destroyed everything. "You loved her. I failed her." The words landed quietly between them. Final. Absolute. Vivian took one slow breath. Then another. No, Lucian's eyes narrowed slightly as though unused to contradiction. "You stayed," she said softly. "You protected her child. You preserved every memory of her inside this house because you could not bear letting the world erase her. That is not failure." Something dangerously fragile crossed his face then. Not weakness. Grief too exhausted to hide properly anymore. Vivian's throat tightened painfully. She had judged this man so cruelly once. Cold Duke. Ice Duke. Heartless aristocrat. Yet now she could not stop seeing him sitting alone beside candlelight reading letters from a dead sister while carrying guilt no human being should bear alone. Lucian looked toward the windows suddenly as though the weight of her gaze itself had become unbearable. "You should not think too kindly of me, Lady Vivian." "Why?" "Because eventually you will discover everyone else was correct." She stared at him quietly. "I do not think they were." The library fell silent again. Snow drifted beyond the glass in soft silver spirals while firelight trembled across the shelves around them. Lucian's expression changed slowly. Careful control giving way to something quieter. Almost vulnerable. "That," he said at last, "may be the most dangerous thing anyone has ever said to me." Before Vivian could answer, the library doors burst open abruptly. Eleanor hurried inside wrapped in a heavy blue blanket trailing behind her like a royal cape. "There you are." She stopped suddenly upon noticing the strange stillness between them both. Her gray eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Were you arguing?" Vivian stepped back quickly enough to nearly collide with the bookshelf. No, Eleanor looked unconvinced. Lucian recovered first. "Of course he did. You are supposed to be resting." "I was resting." Running through hallways wrapped in blankets does not qualify as rest. "It does if one is running very slowly." Vivian laughed despite herself. Lucian closed his eyes briefly in visible defeat. Eleanor brightened immediately at the sound of Vivian laughing. "Good. You should laugh more often." "Eleanor," Lucian warned quietly. "What?" "She looks prettier when she smiles." Vivian felt her cheeks warm instantly. To her astonishment, Lucian looked equally caught off guard by the comment. Eleanor blinked between them both with sudden realization dawning across her face. "Oh," she said softly. Then a mischievous smile spread slowly across her expression. "Oh." Lucian straightened immediately. "I already regret allowing you literacy." Eleanor ignored him completely and crossed toward Vivian instead. "Will you come see the snow fort after supper?" "If your uncle permits it." "He will." Lucian sighed quietly toward the ceiling as though summoning impossible patience from heaven itself. "Apparently I no longer govern my own household." Eleanor grinned triumphantly before disappearing from the library just as quickly as she had arrived, leaving silence behind her once more. But the silence felt different now. Softer somehow. Vivian looked toward Lucian carefully. To her surprise, genuine amusement lingered faintly across his face. Not coldness. Not restraint. Real warmth flickering there for the first time since she had met him. The sight struck her heart with dangerous force. Because suddenly she understood the truth she had been resisting for days now. She no longer feared the Duke of Blackmere at all. And that frightened her far more than his coldness ever had. The carriage ride back to London took nearly 6 hours through roads still buried beneath melting snow and frozen slush. Gray clouds stretched low across the countryside while cold wind rattled against the carriage windows in restless bursts. Lady Ashcombe slept lightly beside her wrapped in blankets against the lingering winter chill, but Vivian remained awake the entire journey. Blackmere Court faded farther behind them with every passing mile. Yet Lucian Ravensshire refused to leave her thoughts behind as easily. She still remembered the expression on his face in the library when she spoke his name. The brief crack in all that careful restraint. The dangerous warmth hidden beneath years of grief and silence. And worst of all, she remembered the strange ache in her chest when Blackmere Court disappeared from view entirely. "You are quiet," her mother murmured softly without opening her eyes. Vivian looked toward the frost-covered window. "I am tired." Lady Ashcombe studied her for a moment anyway. Mothers rarely required full wakefulness to recognize emotional disasters approaching. "Blackmere changed your opinion of the Duke." "Not a question." Vivian hesitated too long. "I misjudged him." Her mother's expression softened faintly. "That happens more often than society likes to admit." London greeted them near dusk beneath icy rain and crowded streets slick with mud from melting snow. Carriages lined Mayfair roads once more, while gas lamps flickered gold against the wet evening air. Yet despite the familiar bustle surrounding Ashcombe House, Vivian felt strangely displaced returning home. Her own drawing room suddenly seemed smaller somehow. Louder, colder in all the wrong ways. By the following afternoon, invitations had already begun arriving again. Balls, musicales, dinner parties. Society resumed its endless performance without mercy or pause. Vivian stood near the sitting room fire scanning invitation cards while her father reviewed financial correspondence nearby. "Lady Dorset is hosting another musicale next Thursday," he remarked absently. "Blackmere will likely attend." Vivian's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the card in her hand. Her father noticed immediately because fathers noticed certain things only when useful to them. "You have become unusually interested in the Duke's schedule." "No," she replied too quickly. Lord Ashcombe looked deeply unconvinced. "Vivian." She set the invitation aside with more force than necessary. Must every conversation in this household eventually become strategic? Only the important ones. She almost argued further before the butler entered carrying a silver tray. A delivery for Lady Vivian. Her pulse betrayed her instantly. Ridiculous. Entirely ridiculous. Yet hope rose anyway before she could stop it. The package proved small and elegantly wrapped in dark blue paper bearing no card. Vivian frowned slightly while untying the ribbon. Inside rested a leather-bound poetry volume she had admired briefly inside Blackmere Court's library 2 days earlier. Her breath caught softly. Lord Ashcombe glanced up from his desk. "Who sent it?" Vivian opened the cover carefully. No letter waited inside. Only a single line written neatly upon the first page in dark ink. Some books deserve to be read beside warmer fires. L.R. heat rose faintly beneath her skin before she could stop it. Her father stood immediately. "Blackmere sent you books?" Vivian closed the cover far too quickly. "Apparently. Interesting." "No," she replied at once. "It is thoughtful." Lord Ashcombe looked almost alarmed by the distinction. 3 evenings later, Vivian found herself once again beneath crystal chandeliers while London society circled endlessly around gossip and music at Lady Dorset's winter ball. The ballroom glowed gold beneath hundreds of candles reflected in towering mirrors, while violins drifted elegantly through the crowded room. Silk gowns swept across polished marble floors in endless waves of color and perfume. Yet despite the beauty surrounding her, Vivian felt restless from the moment she arrived, because she knew he would be here, and because part of her had spent the entire afternoon pretending that knowledge meant nothing at all. "You have looked toward the entrance 12 times, Daphne informed her cheerfully while accepting champagne from a passing servant. Vivian stared ahead with rigid dignity. "That is entirely fabricated." "I counted." Before Vivian could reply, the ballroom shifted subtly around them. Not silence. Recognition. Lucian Ravensshire had arrived. He stood near the entrance speaking briefly with Lady Dorset while snow melted slowly along the shoulders of his dark coat. Candlelight sharpened the severe elegance of his features while guests instinctively made space around him without understanding why they did so. Vivian felt her heartbeat stumble once. Infuriating. "Oh dear," Daphne murmured beside her. You are in terrible trouble. I am doing nothing except standing here. Exactly. And somehow you still look guilty. Lucian's eyes found her almost immediately across the ballroom. No hesitation. No surprise. Recognition moved quietly through his expression before he inclined his head once in greeting. Vivian returned the gesture before common sense entirely abandoned her composure. Because suddenly she wanted to cross the ballroom toward him. Wanted to ask whether Eleanor had recovered from her cough. Wanted to know if he still sat awake alone reading Evelyn's letters beside candlelight after midnight. Wanted far too many dangerous things. Lady Vivian. The smooth feminine voice behind her shattered the moment instantly. Celestia Whitmore approached in silver satin and diamonds once more, beautiful enough to draw half the ballroom's attention effortlessly. Yet tonight her smile carried something sharper beneath it. Lady Celestia, Vivian replied politely. Celestia's gaze drifted briefly toward Lucian across the room before returning to Vivian again. I heard you spent several days at Blackmere Court during the storm. Nearby conversations softened instantly. Of course it did. Society adored scandal almost as much as survival. Vivian kept her expression perfectly composed. The roads became impassable. How fortunate for you. Daphne nearly choked beside her. Celestia ignored her entirely. I confess I was astonished when I heard Blackmere invited guests at all. He generally avoids prolonged company. Perhaps he merely enjoys proving rumors wrong. Something cold flickered behind Celestia's smile then. Does he? Vivian met her gaze evenly. You would know him better than I. Silence sharpened briefly between them. Then Celestia laughed softly enough to sound harmless to anyone not paying attention carefully. One should be cautious with wounded men, Lady Vivian. They often mistake attachment for salvation. Vivian's chest tightened unexpectedly. And one should be cautious with cruel women, she replied softly. They often mistake manipulation for power. Daphne inhaled sharply beside her. Celestia's smile did not disappear. Somehow that made her more unsettling instead. You have become bolder recently. Perhaps I simply became less patient. Across the ballroom, Lucian had stopped speaking with a member of Parliament entirely. His attention remained fixed on them now with unmistakable intensity. He had noticed the tension immediately. Of course he had. Celestia followed Vivian's gaze toward him slowly. Something unreadable passed through her expression. Not affection. Ownership perhaps. Or resentment sharpened over years. You believe you understand him now, she said quietly. Vivian looked back toward her carefully. Do you? For the first time all evening, genuine emotion cracked faintly through Celestia Whitmore's perfect composure. Bitterness. Quick and sharp as broken glass. No one understands Lucian Ravenshire, she said softly. That is precisely the tragedy of him. Before Vivian could answer, the orchestra shifted into a waltz. Couples moved eagerly toward the dance floor beneath glittering chandeliers, while applause echoed lightly through the ballroom. Celestia stepped back gracefully. Enjoy your evening, Lady Vivian. Then she disappeared into the crowd like smoke. Daphne stared after her openly. I dislike her more every time she speaks. Vivian barely heard the comment. Because Lucian was already crossing the ballroom toward her. Women watched him pass openly. Men stepped aside instinctively. Yet the Duke's attention never left her face once. He stopped before her beneath the golden candlelight while the waltz swelled around them. Lady Vivian. His deep voice settled through her pulse like warmth itself. Your Grace. Silence lingered for one dangerous second too long. Then Lucian's eyes shifted briefly toward the space where Celestia had stood moments earlier. Did she upset you? The question startled her. Not because he asked. Because genuine concern moved beneath the calmness of his tone. Vivian straightened slightly. I survived the encounter. That was not my question. Her breath caught softly. Across the ballroom, dancers spun beneath chandeliers, while violins soared through the crowded room. Yet suddenly everything beyond Lucian felt strangely distant. No, she admitted quietly. She did not upset me. His gaze held hers steadily for another moment before nodding once. Good. Then the orchestra softened slightly as couples arranged themselves across the dance floor. Lucien glanced toward the musicians briefly. Something unreadable crossed his face. Tension, perhaps. Old memory. Vivian remembered instantly. He does not dance anymore. Yet before she could look away, Lucien turned back toward her once more. Lady Vivian. Her pulse betrayed her again. Yes. The slightest hesitation crossed his expression. Barely visible. Would you walk with me instead? Not dance. Walk. Such a small request. Somehow infinitely more intimate. Vivian stared at him beneath the candlelight while snow drifted softly beyond the ballroom windows, and the most feared duke in England waited quietly for her answer, as though it mattered far more than either of them wished to admit. Vivian should have refused. Any sensible woman would have. The ballroom remained crowded with London's sharpest observers, and Lucien Ravensheyer standing before her beneath golden chandeliers already attracted enough attention to fuel gossip for weeks. Walking alone with the Duke through Lady Dorset's gardens bordered dangerously close to scandal. Yet when Vivian looked into his grey eyes, she realized with quiet alarm that she no longer possessed the slightest desire to behave sensibly where he was concerned. Very well, she said softly. Something shifted in his expression then. Relief, perhaps. Gone quickly enough that she might have imagined it. Lucien offered his arm without another word. Vivian placed her gloved hand lightly against it while the orchestra continued its waltz behind them, and an entire ballroom watched in stunned fascination. She felt the whispers begin instantly. Good heavens! Blackmere never escorts women anywhere. Who is she to him? Vivian kept her spine perfectly straight as Lucien guided her through the crowded ballroom toward the terrace doors. Yet beneath all that practiced composure, her pulse refused every attempt at dignity. Cold winter air greeted them the moment they stepped outside. Snow still covered the gardens in pale silver beneath moonlight while lanterns glowed softly along frozen pathways. The music from inside became distant almost immediately once the terrace doors closed behind them. Silence settled gently around them instead. Honest silence. Vivian exhaled slowly. I had forgotten how loud ballrooms become. Lucien glanced toward the glowing windows behind them. People speak constantly when they are afraid of hearing themselves think. She looked sideways at him. And are you afraid of that? Constantly. The answer came so quietly she almost missed it. They walked slowly along the snow-covered garden path while breath turned faintly white in the winter air. Bare rose bushes lined the terrace beneath layers of frost sparkling silver beneath moonlight. Somewhere distant, fountain water moved softly beneath ice. You dislike society, Vivian said after a moment. Yet you continue returning to it. Lucien's gaze remained fixed ahead. Duty. Still. Especially still. Vivian studied him carefully beneath the lantern glow. You speak as though attending balls requires military sacrifice. You underestimate London ballrooms. A soft laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Lucien looked down slightly at the sound. The severe lines of his expression softened almost imperceptibly again. Dangerous thing. That softness. Because each time she saw it, the memory of the cold Duke society described faded further away. Eleanor asked about you yesterday, he said quietly after another stretch of silence. Vivian smiled faintly. I hope she has recovered fully. She informed the household this morning that she intends to marry you someday. Vivian nearly slipped on the snowy path. Lucien caught her arm instantly before she lost balance completely. Warm fingers closed carefully around her sleeve. Steady. Protective. The contact lasted only seconds. Yet heat traveled through her pulse with terrifying ease anyway. I beg your pardon, she managed softly. To her astonishment, actual amusement flickered across Lucien's face now. Real amusement. Apparently she has decided you are the only person capable of managing me properly. Vivian stared openly. And what exactly did you say to that? I informed her she was 7 years old and deeply unreasonable. Wise response. She disagreed. Snow drifted lightly from bare branches overhead while lantern light trembled softly across Lucien's dark coat. Vivian became suddenly aware of how alone they truly were out here beyond the ballroom walls. Dangerous awareness. You look happier at Blackmere Court, she admitted quietly before caution intervened. Lucian's expression shifted immediately. Happier. With Eleanor. She lowered her eyes briefly toward the snowy path beneath them. You are different there. Silence stretched between them for several long seconds. Then, quietly, Blackmere is the only place I do not have to pretend. The honesty in his voice tightened something painfully inside her chest. Vivian looked toward the distant ballroom windows glowing gold against the winter night. That sounds lonely. It is. No denial. No attempt at elegant deflection. Just truth. They reached the far end of the terrace where snow-covered hedges shielded them almost entirely from view inside the ballroom. Moonlight silvered the world around them while distant violins drifted faintly through the cold air. Lucian stopped walking then. Vivian turned toward him slowly. Lady Vivian. Her pulse stumbled instantly at the tone of his voice. Too quiet. Too serious. Yes. For a moment he said nothing. His gaze searched her face with unsettling intensity beneath the lantern light. You should distance yourself from me. The words struck unexpectedly hard. Vivian blinked once. That is an unusual thing to say while walking alone with a woman through moonlit gardens. Something flickered faintly near his mouth. Not amusement. Regret, perhaps. I am serious. Why? Lucian looked away toward the snow-covered hedges instead. Because London destroys women connected to me. Evelyn. The memory passed sharply between them without needing words. Vivian stepped slightly closer despite herself. I am not afraid of gossip. You should be. His voice lowered further. Especially now. Before she could ask what he meant, the terrace doors burst open behind them. Laughter spilled briefly into the cold night air along with several members of society seeking fresh air between dances. Vivian recognized Lady Celestia Whitmore immediately among them. Of course she would appear now. Celestia stopped abruptly the moment she saw them standing together beneath the lantern light. The silence that followed felt immediate and dangerous. Her gaze shifted slowly from Lucian to Vivian and back again. How romantic, she said softly. Lucian's entire posture hardened at once beside Vivian. Lady Celestia, your grace. Snow drifted quietly around them, while the other guests nearby pretended very badly not to observe. Celestia descended the terrace steps with graceful confidence, diamonds glittering against silver satin beneath moonlight. I confess I never imagined I would witness the Duke of Blackmere hiding in gardens with a lady. Vivian felt the insult beneath the elegant wording immediately. Lucian did too. You should return inside, he said coldly. Celestia smiled faintly. Why? Am I interrupting something important? Yes. The answer came instantly. Vivian's breath caught softly. So did Celestia's, though she recovered quickly enough. How unexpected. Her eyes settled on Vivian now with unsettling sharpness. Tell me, Lady Vivian, has His Grace mentioned why he avoids waltzes? Lucian's jaw tightened visibly. Vivian noticed at once. That is hardly my business. No. Celestia tilted her head slightly. Perhaps he omitted the detail because it concerns another woman. Silence. Heavy and immediate. Vivian looked toward Lucian instinctively. His expression had gone dangerously unreadable now. Enough, he said quietly. Celestia ignored him entirely. You deserve honesty, Lady Vivian. Her voice softened almost sympathetically. After all, it would be unfortunate if you developed feelings for a man still haunted by another woman's memory. The cruelty landed precisely where intended. Vivian felt it. More importantly, she saw Lucian feel it too. Something closed behind his eyes instantly. Pain buried beneath years of discipline. Celestia stepped closer beneath the lantern glow. Tell her, Lucian. The use of his given name sounded strangely possessive coming from her. Tell her why you stopped dancing. Lucian's gaze never left Celestia now. Return inside. Or what? The temperature in his voice dropped further. Do not force me to repeat myself. Nearby guests had gone entirely silent by now. Watching. Waiting. Society adored public destruction. Vivian understood suddenly with terrible clarity exactly what Evelyn must have endured years ago. Not open cruelty. Worse. Elegant humiliation delivered with smiling faces and polished voices beneath chandeliers. Celestia looked toward Vivian once more. He stopped dancing after his sister died, she said softly. Because the last waltz they shared ended the same evening her scandal began. Vivian's chest tightened painfully. Lucien remained motionless beside her. Too motionless. People whispered they argued before she disappeared from the ballroom. Celestia continued gently. How tragic to carry guilt for such things. Lady Celestia. Lucien's voice cut through the night with quiet finality. Even the falling snow seemed to still around them. Celestia smiled faintly anyway. Forgive me. I simply dislike unfinished stories. Vivian looked toward Lucien carefully. Moonlight sharpened every harsh line of his face now while pain and fury warred silently beneath all that restraint. Yet he said nothing in his own defense. Not one word. Because perhaps some part of him still believed he deserved the guilt. The realization hurt unexpectedly. Celestia turned gracefully back toward the terrace. Enjoy your evening. Then she disappeared inside with the others trailing after her in nervous silence, leaving the snow-covered gardens empty once more. For several seconds, neither Vivian nor Lucien moved at all. Distant music drifted faintly from the ballroom beyond the glass doors. Vivian looked toward him slowly. Lucien. He stepped back immediately. Not dramatic. Reflexive. Like a wounded instinct suddenly awakened. You should return inside, he said quietly. The walls had returned around him entirely now. Cold. Controlled. Untouchable. Vivian's heart tightened painfully. Do not do that. His gaze lifted sharply toward her. Do what? Push me away because someone else chose cruelty. Snow fell softly between them while lantern light trembled against the frozen garden paths. Lucien stared at her for one long, unbearable moment. Then, quietly, You do not understand what it costs to stand beside me. The grief in his voice hurt worse than anger would have. Before Vivian could answer, he turned and disappeared into the winter darkness beyond the terrace gardens, leaving her standing alone beneath falling snow while the ballroom glowed warm behind the windows and somewhere deep inside her chest. Fear began quietly taking shape. Not fear of Lucien Ravensheyer. Fear of how deeply she already cared for him. Vivian remained in the garden long after Lucien disappeared into the darkness beyond the terrace. Snow gathered lightly along the sleeves of her cloak while distant music continued drifting from the ballroom behind her. Yet she barely heard it anymore. Her thoughts remained fixed entirely on the expression she had seen in Lucien's eyes before he walked away. Not anger. Not coldness. Fear. The realization unsettled her more deeply than anything Celestia Whitmore had said. Because powerful men were not supposed to look afraid. Especially not of caring for someone. Lady Vivian. Daphne's voice startled her from the terrace doorway several minutes later. Good heavens. Everyone inside looks ready to collapse from curiosity. Vivian turned slowly. Then society may finally experience useful suffering. Daphne crossed toward her through the snow with narrowed eyes. You are upset. I am thinking. That is usually worse. Vivian glanced back toward the darkened gardens one final time before returning inside. Warmth and candlelight swallowed them immediately. The ballroom remained glittering and crowded exactly as before. Yet the atmosphere had shifted subtly now. Too many people watched her openly. Too many conversations stopped the moment she passed nearby. Scandal traveled faster than winter wind in London society. There she is. Did you see them together outside? Blackmere looked furious. Or jealous. Vivian kept her chin high while moving through the ballroom beside Daphne, though humiliation burned quietly beneath her composure. Not because she regretted walking with Lucien. Never that. Because she suddenly understood how easily society could twist even kindness into spectacle. Across the room, Celestia Whitmore stood surrounded by admirers near the orchestra platform wearing silver satin and serene satisfaction. Their eyes met briefly through the crowded ballroom. Celestia smiled. Vivian had never disliked another woman more. I am going home, Vivian said quietly. Daphne blinked. Already? I have lost my appetite for aristocratic entertainment. Before Daphne could protest further, movement near the ballroom entrance caught Vivian's attention. Lucien had returned. Snow still clung faintly to his dark coat while candlelight sharpened every severe line of his expression. He looked composed again. Untouchable again. Yet Vivian noticed the exhaustion beneath it immediately now that she understood where to look. Conversations softened instantly around him. The Duke ignored all of it. His eyes found Vivian across the ballroom at once. The rest of the room seemed to disappear for one dangerous second. Then Lady Dorset intercepted him with nervous laughter, and several gentlemen from Parliament approached beside her. Duty reclaimed him immediately. Vivian felt disappointment settle unexpectedly inside her chest. Ridiculous feeling. Dangerous feeling. She looked away first. "Oh dear," Daphne murmured quietly. "You truly are in love with him." Vivian froze completely. "Do not say absurd things. I only state obvious ones." "Daphne, you look at him as though the rest of the room disappears." Vivian swallowed hard. "That is not love." Daphne's expression softened slightly. "Then what is it?" Vivian could not answer, because somewhere deep inside herself, she already feared the truth. 2 days later, London awoke to scandal. Vivian discovered this at breakfast when Lord Ashcombe unfolded the morning paper and went abruptly still. Silence stretched across the table. Lady Ashcombe looked up immediately. "Edmund." He lowered the newspaper slowly. His expression had darkened with visible alarm. "Vivian." Unease curled instantly through her stomach. "What is it?" Without speaking, Lord Ashcombe handed her the paper. Vivian scanned the article quickly. Then again more slowly when the words refused to make sense at first. Rumors continue surrounding the Duke of Blackmere and Lady Vivian Ashcombe, following their increasingly intimate public appearances. Sources close to society suggest the young lady has spent significant unsupervised time at Blackmere Court despite the Duke's tragic history with vulnerable women. Concerned observers question whether Lady Ashcombe fully understands the emotional instability long associated with His Grace since his sister's notorious scandal and death. Vivian's hands tightened around the newspaper. "This is vile." "It is deliberate," Lord Ashcombe said grimly. "Someone wanted this printed." Vivian already knew who. Celestia Whitmore. Rage rose swiftly beneath her ribs. Not only for herself now. For Lucian. Because every line in the article carried the same cruelty that had destroyed Evelyn years ago. Elegant destruction disguised as concern. "People will talk," Lady Ashcombe said quietly, though her expression remained troubled. "They already are." By evening, the whispers had become unbearable. At Lady Penrose's dinner gathering, conversations stopped each time Vivian entered a room. Women smiled too brightly. Men looked overly sympathetic. Humiliation spread invisibly through every polished interaction. "Lady Vivian." A countess approached during supper with false gentleness coating every word. "I do hope you are being careful." Vivian stared evenly across the candlelit table. "About what precisely?" "Well." The woman lowered her voice theatrically. "Blackmere has such a tragic history with emotional attachments." Vivian set down her wineglass quietly before answering. "How fortunate then that London continues proving itself emotionally detached enough for everyone." The Countess blinked in stunned silence. Nearby guests pretended sudden fascination with dessert. Yet even after the woman retreated, the humiliation lingered. Vivian understood now what Lucian had tried warning her about in the garden. Society did not merely gossip. Consumed people, piece by piece. Later that evening, Vivian escaped briefly into Lady Penrose's winter garden, seeking silence away from the ballroom. Frost coated the glass conservatory windows, while candle lanterns glowed softly among sleeping roses and ivy. For the first time all night, she could breathe properly again. "I should have stopped this sooner." Lucian's voice behind her sent her pulse stumbling instantly. Vivian turned. He stood near the conservatory entrance, still wearing black evening attire, though fatigue shadowed his face more visibly tonight. "You did not write the article." "No," his jaw tightened. "But I knew this would happen eventually." Vivian crossed her arms lightly against the cold. "Celestia Whitmore despises you." "Yes." "Why?" Silence. Then quietly. "Because once, long ago, she mistook my kindness for affection." Vivian felt something unpleasant tighten inside her chest. Not jealousy exactly. Something dangerously close. Lucian noticed immediately. Of course he did. "There was never anything between us," he said at once. She wanted marriage. I refused. And she punished Evelyn for it. His eyes darkened with old grief. Indirectly, perhaps. But yes. The honesty in his voice hurt more than denial would have. Vivian looked away toward the frost-covered conservatory glass. She is trying to ruin me now. I know. His voice lowered further. That is why you must stay away from me. Anger rose instantly through her exhaustion. No, Lucien went still. No. Vivian stepped closer before caution could stop her. I am tired of you deciding what destroys me. Candlelight trembled softly between them while distant music drifted faintly from the ballroom beyond the conservatory doors. Lucien watched her with dangerous intensity now. You do not understand the cost. Then explain it to me. Silence. Heavy and immediate. At last Lucien looked away first. Every person I love suffers. The words landed softly, devastatingly. Vivian's chest tightened painfully. Lucien, do not. His voice roughened slightly for the first time since she had known him. Please. She had never heard him plead before. The sound nearly broke her heart. You blame yourself for things cruel people chose to do. Because I should have protected them better. You cannot protect people from every whisper in London. No, he looked back at her then with exhausted honesty stripped completely bare beneath the conservatory candlelight. But I would destroy myself trying. Vivian's breath caught softly, because suddenly she understood. The coldness, the distance, the endless restraint. Lucien Ravensheyer did not avoid attachment because he lacked feeling. He avoided it because he felt too much. Look at me, she whispered. He obeyed instantly. Dangerous mistake for both of them. Vivian stepped closer still until barely inches remained between them beneath the winter roses and trembling candlelight. I am not Evelyn, she said softly. Pain flickered across his face at the name. And I am not some fragile creature society can shatter because a few cruel people grow bored. Lucien stared at her silently. The restraint inside him looked dangerously thin now. Vivian. The way he spoke her name nearly unraveled every remaining sensible thought she possessed. She should step back. Leave. Preserve what remained of her reputation before London devoured it completely. Instead she reached slowly for his hand resting tense beside him. Warm fingers closed around his before he could retreat. Lucien inhaled sharply. Such a small touch. Yet the effect moved through both of them like fire catching unexpectedly beneath winter snow. You asked me once to distance myself from you, she whispered. I cannot. His eyes closed briefly as though the confession itself wounded him somehow. You should. I know. Silence wrapped around them softly, intimately. Somewhere beyond the conservatory, violins continued playing for a ballroom that suddenly felt impossibly far away. Lucien opened his eyes again slowly. Every wall around him had fallen completely now. Grief, fear, want, all visible beneath the candlelight at last. If I kiss you, he said quietly, there will be no returning from it. Vivian's pulse thundered painfully beneath her skin. Then perhaps, she whispered back, we should stop pretending either of us still wishes to return. Lucien stared at her for one unbearable second longer. Then footsteps echoed suddenly beyond the conservatory entrance, accompanied by approaching voices from the ballroom corridor. The moment shattered instantly. Lucien stepped back first with visible effort while Vivian's heart stumbled painfully in protest. A servant appeared moments later through the doorway looking alarmed. Your Grace. Lucien's entire expression hardened immediately. What is it? Miss Eleanor has taken ill. Everything changed at once. Fear crossed Lucien's face openly for the first time since Vivian had met him. Not controlled fear. Real fear. Raw and immediate. Without another word, he turned and disappeared from the conservatory almost at a run, leaving Vivian standing alone beneath winter roses while candlelight flickered across frost-covered glass and the echo of almost kisses lingered painfully in the cold air between them. Rain hammered against the carriage windows as Vivian traveled through the night toward Blackmere Court beside Lucien in suffocating silence. The moment the servant delivered news of Eleanor's illness, everything else had ceased to matter instantly. The ballroom, the whispers, the almost kiss beneath candlelight, gone. Lucien had arranged the carriage within minutes with frightening efficiency, while storm clouds swallowed London behind them. Now he sat across from her beneath the dim lantern glow, one gloved hand clenched tightly against his knee while rain streaked endlessly across the glass beside him. Vivian had never seen him like this before. Not controlled fear. Not restrained grief. This was worse. Helplessness. "She was well when I left Blackmere," he said suddenly, though the words sounded more like something spoken to himself than to her. The physicians believed the fever had passed. Vivian watched him carefully through the swaying carriage light. Children become ill quickly. Lucien looked toward the storm outside. And sometimes they disappear just as quickly. The quiet devastation in his voice tightened her chest painfully. She remembered Evelyn's letters. The guilt Lucien carried like chains beneath every careful movement he made. He was terrified history intended to punish him again. Vivian leaned forward slightly before thinking better of it. "Eleanor is strong." Lucien closed his eyes briefly. So was her mother. Silence swallowed the carriage once more afterward. Rain battered the roof overhead while horse hooves struck muddy roads with relentless rhythm beneath the storm. Vivian wanted to reach for his hand again. Wanted to tell him he was not alone this time. Yet something about his expression stopped her. He looked balanced on the edge of breaking entirely. Nearly 4 hours later, Blackmere Court emerged through the rain and darkness like a shadowed fortress against the storm. Lanterns blazed along the front entrance while servants hurried forward the moment the carriage stopped. Lucien was already out before the footman fully opened the door. "How long?" he demanded immediately. The butler bowed quickly. "The fever worsened an hour ago, Your Grace. Dr. Whitmore remains upstairs now." Vivian watched Lucien go completely still. Dangerous stillness. And Eleanor? Awake intermittently. Lucien crossed the entrance hall almost immediately without another word. Vivian followed beside Lady Ashcombe while thunder rolled outside and servants moved through the manor with visible tension. Blackmere Court no longer felt merely quiet tonight. Felt frightened. The upstairs corridor outside Eleanor's room glowed dimly beneath candle sconces while physicians and servants moved carefully through the hushed hallway. Lucien stood near the bedroom doorway speaking in low tones with Dr. Whitmore, whose expression remained grave enough to freeze the air itself. Vivian approached slowly. "What happened?" Lucien looked toward her. For one terrible moment, she saw pure exhaustion strip through every wall he possessed. The fever returned to her lungs. Dr. Whitmore adjusted his spectacles carefully. "The next several hours are important." Important. Aristocrats used careful words for terrifying things. Lucien's jaw tightened visibly. She was improving. Children in her condition often change rapidly. Vivian noticed immediately that Lucien had stopped hearing the physician entirely. His attention remained fixed on the closed bedroom door behind them as though fear itself waited beyond it. "May I see her?" she asked softly. Lucien looked toward her again. Something vulnerable flickered briefly across his face. "She has been asking for you." The words struck unexpectedly deep. A maid opened the door quietly moments later, allowing Vivian inside. Eleanor's bedroom glowed softly beneath candlelight while rain whispered faintly against the windows beyond heavy velvet curtains. The little girl looked impossibly small beneath layers of blankets against the enormous bed. Her cheeks were flushed with fever while damp curls clung lightly to her forehead. Yet the moment she saw Vivian enter, her tired gray eyes brightened faintly. "You came." Vivian crossed immediately toward the bedside chair. "Of course I did." Eleanor managed a weak smile. Uncle Lucien looked terrifying downstairs. Vivian glanced briefly toward the doorway where Lucien still stood watching them silently. Even from across the room, tension radiated from him like cold through winter stone. "He was worried about you." Eleanor frowned slightly. "He worries too much." The child's voice sounded fragile now. Then, Vivian carefully brushed damp hair away from her forehead. "That is because he loves you very much." Eleanor's eyes drifted sleepily toward the doorway. "I know." Lucien turned away abruptly then, as though hearing the words aloud hurt somehow. Hours passed slowly afterward beneath endless rain and trembling candlelight. Vivian remained beside Eleanor's bed while physicians came and went quietly through the room. Lady Ashcombe rested briefly downstairs. Servants carried fresh water and medicine with nervous efficiency. Yet Lucien never left entirely. He stood near the windows, near the fireplace, near the doorway, watching constantly, waiting. Every time Eleanor coughed, his entire body went rigid. Sometime after midnight, the fever worsened again. Dr. Whitmore's expression darkened noticeably while checking Eleanor's pulse. Lucien crossed the room instantly. "Tell me the truth." The physician hesitated. "Her breathing is strained." "That is not an answer." Dr. Whitmore lowered his voice carefully. "If the fever does not break before morning, we may face complications." Silence crashed heavily through the room. Vivian felt it physically. Lucien remained perfectly motionless beside the bed while Eleanor slept restlessly beneath candlelight. Then, quietly, "Leave us." The physician bowed slightly before withdrawing with the servants. Soon only Vivian and Lucien remained beside Eleanor in the dim room while rain battered the windows outside. Lucien sat slowly in the chair opposite Vivian at last. The movement looked almost mechanical now. Exhaustion carved sharp shadows beneath his eyes while damp curls had fallen loose against his forehead from running hands through his hair repeatedly over the past hours. Vivian had never seen him look less like a duke, or more human. "When Evelyn became ill," he said suddenly into the silence, "I convinced myself she would recover." Vivian's throat tightened instantly. Lucien stared at Eleanor's sleeping face without blinking. "I remember thinking there would still be time to repair everything afterward. Time to protect her properly. Time to make her believe the world had not entirely abandoned her." His voice roughened slightly. "There was not." Vivian reached for his hand before thinking. This time he did not pull away. His fingers closed tightly around hers instead. Desperately almost. "Lucien," she whispered softly, "you cannot lose everyone." A broken sound nearly escaped him then. Not quite grief. Worse, hope fighting against despair after years of exhaustion. He bowed his head briefly while still holding her hand. "I do not know how to survive it again if I do." The honesty nearly shattered her heart completely. Vivian moved closer beside him without releasing his hand. Candlelight flickered gently across Eleanor's sleeping face while thunder echoed faintly beyond the rain-soaked windows. "You will not face it alone," she whispered. Lucien looked at her then. Really looked at her. Every wall gone now beneath fear and exhaustion and unbearable tenderness. He no longer possessed strength to hide. "Vivian." Her name sounded like prayer in his voice. Slowly, almost cautiously, he lifted her hand toward his lips. The kiss against her gloved knuckles lasted barely a second. Yet emotion moved through it so deeply her breath caught painfully. "I am trying very hard not to love you," he confessed quietly. Tears burned unexpectedly behind her eyes. "That seems unfortunate." A faint, exhausted smile touched his mouth for the briefest moment. "You make failure feel inevitable." Before she could answer, movement stirred weakly from the bed. Eleanor shifted restlessly beneath the blankets with a small sound of discomfort. Lucien released Vivian's hand instantly and leaned toward his niece at once. "Eleanor." The child's eyes fluttered open slowly. Fever still burned across her cheeks, yet her breathing sounded slightly easier now. Dr. Whitmore hurried back inside moments later after hearing movement from the hallway. He checked Eleanor carefully while the room held its breath around him. Then, finally, the physician exhaled quietly in relief. "The fever is breaking." Vivian closed her eyes briefly as exhaustion and gratitude swept through her at once. Across the bed, Lucien remained completely still for one long second before lowering his head sharply as though the relief itself weakened him. Eleanor blinked sleepily between them. "Why is everyone crying?" Vivian laughed softly through the tears threatening her composure. "No one is crying. Uncle Lucien looks like he might." Lucien let out one quiet breath that almost resembled disbelief. "Go back to sleep, Eleanor." "Bossy," she murmured weakly before drifting back into exhausted sleep. Silence settled softly through the room afterward. Different now. Lighter somehow. Rain continued whispering beyond the windows while candlelight glowed warmly against the dark walls. Dr. Whitmore gathered his instruments quietly near the doorway. She should recover fully with rest. Lucien nodded once, unable to speak immediately. The physician hesitated before looking between Lucien and Vivian carefully. Then, with surprising gentleness, "Your Grace, sometimes surviving grief requires allowing oneself happiness afterward." Lucien said nothing, yet his eyes shifted slowly toward Vivian beside him. And for the first time since she had known him, she saw something stronger than fear beginning to rise beneath all his grief. Hope. Morning sunlight spilled across Blackmere Court 3 days later for the first time in nearly a week. Winter still gripped the countryside beyond the manor windows, but the endless storms had finally passed, leaving the world outside glittering beneath fresh snow and pale gold light. Inside the estate, warmth had returned slowly. Servants smiled again. Fires burned brighter. And somewhere upstairs, Eleanor had already begun arguing with her nurse about whether recovery truly required remaining in bed. Vivian stood near the library windows watching sunlight spill across the frozen gardens below, while a cup of tea cooled forgotten between her hands. Peace should have settled easily around her after Eleanor's recovery. Instead, nervousness had followed her all morning with relentless persistence, because Lucien had barely spoken to her since that night beside Eleanor's bedside. Not coldness. Not distance. Something quieter. More dangerous. Hope had changed him, and hope frightened wounded men almost as deeply as grief once had. Footsteps sounded softly behind her. Vivian turned slowly. Lucien stood near the doorway wearing dark morning attire instead of formal evening black for once. Sunlight softened him unexpectedly. Without candlelight or ballroom shadows, the exhaustion beneath his features appeared gentler now. Human. Real. Eleanor informs me she intends to survive entirely out of spite toward medical authority, he said quietly. Relief loosened something inside Vivian immediately at the familiar dry tone. A very admirable reason to recover. Lucien crossed farther into the library while snowlight drifted silver through the windows around them. Dr. Whitmore claims she may return to the gardens within a week. Then Blackmere Court will never know peace again. A faint smile touched his mouth. Real this time, not hidden quickly afterward. The sight still stole breath from her chest with alarming ease. Silence settled gently between them afterward. Comfortable silence now. Yet beneath it, tension waited quietly. Neither of them seemed entirely certain how to stand beside the other after what had almost happened in the conservatory. After what had been confessed beside Eleanor's bed. Lucien stopped beside the fire at last. Vivian. Her pulse betrayed her instantly hearing her name spoken that way. Softly. Personally. Yes. He looked toward her with visible hesitation. Strange thing to witness from the Duke of Blackmere. You should return to London today. The words struck harder than they should have. Vivian lowered her teacup slowly. I see. Lucien's jaw tightened immediately. That is not what I meant. No. If you remain here much longer, society will destroy your reputation entirely. Vivian studied him carefully beneath the winter sunlight. And if I return, the gossip may eventually fade. May. Bitterness slipped quietly into the word before she could stop it. Lucien crossed toward the windows then, visibly restless now. I have spent years surviving scandal. You should not be forced into the same existence because of me. Vivian felt sudden exhaustion settle through her chest. Not from society. From this endless fear ruling every choice he made. Lucien. He looked toward her immediately. You are still trying to protect me by pushing me away. Yes. The honesty startled her despite everything. Because I know what London becomes once it smells weakness. Vivian set the teacup aside entirely. Then perhaps London should finally learn it no longer frightens me. Something sharp flickered behind his eyes. Emotion held too tightly for too long. You say that now. I say it because it is true. Lucien turned away briefly toward the snow-covered gardens outside. Vivian. His voice lowered almost painfully. If they hurt you because of me, I will never forgive myself. Her chest tightened. Slowly, she crossed the room toward him until only a few feet separated them beneath the pale winter light. Then stop treating me like Evelyn. The moment the words left her mouth, silence crashed heavily between them. Lucien went completely still. Vivian immediately regretted the sharpness of it. I did not mean... No, his voice sounded rougher than usual now. You are right. He looked at her then with exhausted honesty stripped completely bare once more. I have spent years trying to prevent history from repeating itself. Vivian's throat tightened painfully. You cannot imprison yourself inside grief forever. I know. Then why are you still trying? Lucien stared at her for one long moment beneath the sunlight. Then, quietly, because losing you would destroy what remains of me. Every breath inside her seemed to vanish at once. He had never spoken so plainly before. Never allowed himself such dangerous honesty. Vivian stepped closer instinctively. You will not lose me. Lucien laughed softly then. Not amused. Wounded. You cannot promise that. Before she could answer, rapid footsteps echoed suddenly through the corridor outside. Eleanor burst into the library wrapped dramatically in blankets despite her nurse chasing several feet behind. I escaped, she announced triumphantly. Lucien closed his eyes briefly in visible defeat. You are impossible. The doctor said fresh air is healthy. This is a library. Books are fresh enough. Vivian laughed softly despite herself while Eleanor climbed onto the sofa near the fire with enormous effort and theatrical suffering. I am being terribly mistreated, the child informed her solemnly. Your uncle insists I remain alive. Cruel man, Vivian agreed. Eleanor narrowed her gray eyes suspiciously between them both. You were arguing. No, Lucien said immediately. Yes, Vivian answered at the same time. Eleanor pointed triumphantly. Ha! Lucien sighed toward the ceiling. You encourage rebellion. Only intelligent rebellion. The child studied them for another long moment before something mischievous slowly brightened across her face. Good. Lucien looked wary instantly. That expression concerns me. Eleanor ignored him completely. Because everyone downstairs is talking about the ball tonight. Vivian blinked. What ball? Lady Barrington's winter charity gala, Lucien answered quietly. I had forgotten. Eleanor looked horrified. Impossible. Everyone in London is going. An excellent reason to avoid it. No, the child pointed dramatically at both of them. You must go. Lucien folded his arms calmly. And why exactly must we? Eleanor's expression suggested the answer should have been obvious to all intelligent life. Because everyone says terrible things about you. Silence followed. Sharp and immediate. Even the nurse looked uncomfortable now. Eleanor's small face tightened with frustration. They always whisper when they think I cannot hear. Lucien's expression softened instantly. Eleanor. No. It is mean. Her voice trembled slightly now beneath the blankets. They say Mama was bad. They say you make ladies unhappy. They say Lady Vivian should stay away from us. Vivian felt her heart ache painfully. Lucien crossed toward the sofa immediately and knelt beside his niece. Listen to me. Eleanor looked at him with suspiciously bright eyes. People who gossip are often cruel because cruelty makes them feel important. His voice remained low and steady. But none of it changes the truth about your mother. Eleanor swallowed hard. What was the truth? Silence settled through the library. Vivian watched Lucien carefully. This mattered. More than ballroom whispers or scandal columns or frightened reputations. Lucien brushed one gentle hand against Eleanor's dark curls. Your mother was kind, he said quietly, and brave, and she loved you more than anything in this world. Eleanor's eyes shimmered with tears now. Then why does everyone talk about her like she did something wrong? Pain crossed Lucien's face briefly. Then something changed. Not grief this time. Resolve. Because, he said softly, I allowed them to. Vivian felt the shift instantly. So did Eleanor. The Duke rose slowly to his full height afterward and looked toward the winter sunlight beyond the library windows. Every line of him seemed sharper suddenly. Decided. Prepare the carriage for London, he told the waiting servant near the doorway. Your Grace. Lucien turned back toward them both. We will attend Lady Barrington's gala tonight after all. Eleanor gasped softly beneath the blankets. Vivian stared at him. Lucien. His eyes met hers steadily now. Calm. Powerful. Certain. I spent 3 years allowing society to define my family through whispers because I believed silence protected us. He crossed slowly toward Vivian beneath the pale winter light. I was wrong. Her pulse quickened painfully. What are you planning? Something almost dangerous flickered beneath his composure now. Not coldness. Conviction. For once, he said quietly, I intend to speak before London speaks for me. Night fell across Mayfair beneath glittering snowfall while Lady Barrington's ballroom blazed with golden light and endless conversation. Aristocrats filled the enormous hall beneath crystal chandeliers, while violins echoed through the crowded room and servants moved endlessly among silk gowns and polished black coats. Yet beneath the elegance, tension simmered visibly tonight, because rumors had already spread that the Duke of Blackmere intended to appear publicly after weeks of scandal surrounding Lady Vivian Ashcombe. Society had arrived hungry for spectacle. Everyone is staring, Daphne whispered beside Vivian near the ballroom entrance. Vivian barely heard her, because Lucian stood only a few feet away speaking briefly with Lord Barrington while candlelight flickered across the severe lines of his face. Calm, controlled. Yet she sensed the storm beneath that calmness now. He had made some decision inside himself tonight. She could feel it. Conversations shifted suddenly through the ballroom. Heads turned toward the grand staircase. Celestia Whitmore descended slowly in silver satin beneath the chandeliers, looking breathtaking enough to silence half the room. Her eyes found Lucian immediately, then Vivian. A faint victorious smile touched her mouth. She still believed she controlled this evening. Lucian looked toward Vivian, then crossed the ballroom directly toward her through the sea of watching guests. Silence spread behind him like winter itself moving through the room. He stopped before her beneath the crystal light. Lady Vivian. Her pulse thundered. Your Grace. For one long moment he simply looked at her. Not the ballroom. Not the whispering guests surrounding them. Only her. Then, slowly, Lucian extended his hand. Gasps rippled softly through nearby guests. Vivian stared at him in shock. Lucian. His voice lowered enough that only she could hear the next words. Look at me. Not them. The same words she had once needed without realizing it. Emotion tightened painfully in her chest. Around them, the ballroom waited breathlessly. Celestia watched from across the room with growing unease now. Lucian's gray eyes never left Vivian's face. I am done allowing cruel people to decide what survives, he said quietly. Including this. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed it in his. Warm fingers closed around hers with absolute certainty. Then, before all of London's society beneath blazing chandeliers and stunned silence, the Duke of Blackmere led her directly onto the ballroom floor. The orchestra faltered in visible confusion, because everyone knew Lucian Ravensshire did not dance anymore. Yet he stopped with Vivian at the center of the floor and looked toward the musicians calmly. Continue. The waltz resumed shakily at first, then stronger. Lucian turned back toward Vivian. I may step on your feet. Despite everything, a soft laugh escaped her. A terrifying scandal indeed. Something warm flickered fully across his face then. Not hidden this time. Not buried. Real. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as the most feared duke in England placed one hand carefully against Vivian's waist and began to dance for the first time in 3 years. Snow drifted softly beyond the towering windows while chandeliers blazed overhead and whispers died completely around them. Because suddenly no one dared speak at all. Lucian guided her across the ballroom floor with quiet steadiness despite the visible emotion tightening every line of his expression. Vivian's heart ached watching him. This was not merely a dance. It was grief learning how to breathe again. Halfway through the waltz, Lucian leaned slightly closer beneath the music. I loved you long before I intended to. Tears burned unexpectedly behind her eyes. That seems to happen often with us. His thumb brushed faintly against her gloved hand. Small movement, devastatingly tender. Vivian. Yes. The ballroom disappeared entirely around them then. Only music remained. Candlelight. Snow beyond the glass. And the man she had once mistaken for Heartless looking at her, as though she had given him back something he believed lost forever. Marry me, Lucian whispered softly. Her breath caught painfully. Around them, London society watched in stunned silence, while the Duke of Blackmere danced beneath chandeliers with the woman everyone warned should stay away from him. Vivian smiled through tears she no longer bothered hiding. "I thought you disliked public spectacle." Lucien's expression softened completely at last. "Only until I found something worth choosing publicly." She had mistaken silence for cruelty once. Mistaken grief for coldness. Feared the man standing before her because she had only seen the walls around his heart instead of the love hidden behind them. But now, beneath winter chandeliers while snow fell softly outside and London society witnessed the impossible with stunned silence, Vivian finally understood the truth. Lucien Ravenshayer had never been heartless at all. He had simply been carrying too much sorrow to believe he deserved happiness again. And when she whispered yes against the music beneath the glow of 1,000 candles, the Duke who had spent years fearing love finally smiled without grief shadowing it for the very first time.